This is a Momentum Media production.
The SMSF Advisor Show. Your expert insights into the biggest themes shaping the SMSF advice industry.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the SMSF Advisor Show. I'm Miranda Brownlee, and I'm joined by my co-host, Aaron Dunn. Hi, Aaron.
Hi, Miranda. How are you?
I'm good, and yourself?
Not too bad. On the mad rush to Christmas, isn't it now? So there's plenty going on, and I'm sure many of the practitioners out there are working feverishly right through in these sort of final 5 or 6 weeks through to Christmas. So plenty going on, as is always the way, and we kick off today's session with what's making news.
Yes, so it is a busy time of year, and we do have that director ID deadline coming up as well at the end of this month. And the ATO has actually just released a draft legislative instrument on director IDs this week, which makes some changes around resigned directors.
Yeah, so this is something really hot off the press, isn't it? We were only talking about this just before we came on air for today. And so ABRS 2022/D1 is really going to give relief to those that were previously directors prior to the 4th of April 2021. And then there's an extra period between the 4th of April to the 31st of October 2021. But in essence, where they're ceasing that role by the 30th of November 2022. So that means, for example, if we had a director or directors of a self-managed super fund with a corporate trustee, that is the only time in which they hold any directorship positions. They're not intending on holding that directorship beyond the wind-up of the fund. Let's say that happened at the 30th of June 2022. As long as they've ceased that director role by the 30th of November, this legislative instrument is not going to require them now to have to get that director ID. The problem, I guess, is, we haven't had this information for some time. So there will be a number of clients who have gone through and have obtained those. And I'm sure there's going to be a sense of frustration within the industry to say, we've kind of gone through all this work and frustration, and now you're telling us we don't have to do it. I guess the reality is it's better late than never.
Yes, it is probably a bit frustrating that it's come this late in the game, but as you said, at least we have something now, which I'm sure will still be helpful for a lot of people given what the numbers were not too long ago.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. I think the ATO probably a month or so ago had indicated maybe it was at half that, of SMSF directors had not yet obtained the director ID. I mean, this isn't going to fix that issue significantly, but it will make a material dent in that figure regardless when you think about the number of wind-ups and stuff that happen year on year.
Yeah, and we've also had a few things happening on the political front lately. So we've had Labor sort of make it quite clear that they are going to be looking at some of the tax concessions in super once they've set an objective for super.
Yeah, so a lot of the things that we spoke about in our last budget update that we did, we spoke about, I guess, what was included but also not included. So some of those things that we spoke about seem to be getting a bit more discussion and activity. So thinking about high balance caps and whether there's some sort of restriction on the amount that can be held in super. Quite clearly, we've seen some pushback. SMSF associations being quite vocal in that. There are a number of challenges to having to unwind investments that may sit within funds in that sort of scenario. And also we touched on the fact that we may see a Div 293 threshold reduction as well. So if we do see those stage 3 tax cuts go through, maybe the flip side of it is that they can pick up some of the revenue back through the Div 293 threshold dropping, say, from 250 to 200,000, or whether it even aligns into the top marginal threshold at $180,000, and then maybe see that indexing over time. So there are a number of things. So the betting man in me says I'm not going to get much sleep in May 2023 on budget night, as opposed to what I have in the last couple of years.
Yes, definitely looks like there's some changes on the horizon.
Yeah.
And we've also seen a bit of an increase in SMSF trustee disqualifications. So in the first September quarter, it was 251 individuals that were disqualified, which is fairly high when you consider the fact that it was only 252, I think it was, for the previous year. So, basically had a whole year just in that first quarter.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting. And as you said, when you compare it statistically year on year, I guess there's a couple of things that come to my mind here when we think about this. One is we're seeing more contraventions being issued because of the significant amount of audits that changed in the last financial year, that 2021-2022 financial year, where the independence changes came in. So off the back of that, there's a potential for a much higher number, and the ATO naturally working through that. The other one, of course, is just coming out of the back end of COVID and what potential issues may have occurred with trustees from a compliance point of view throughout that time. And then again, the ATO working through that program and again, identifying much higher numbers than we've ever seen before. And it'll be interesting when we talk to Dan Butler, our guest speaker today, about this voluntary disclosure early engagement process and the role that, trustees in essence getting disqualified means in this as well.
Yeah. We've also seen the government recently come out with draft legislation changes to the ABN system. This will essentially mean that where you have outstanding lodgements, your ABN will be deactivated, which is obviously going to have a big impact on SMSFs that have outstanding lodgements.
Yeah, so we know the ABN is a central requirement for a fund in terms of its compliance activity and what it can do. So if we think about if you're late lodging, the ATO can put a hold on contributions, can put a hold on rollovers through the superstream standard. So this is kind of a next step, isn't it? Because if in essence, it gets cancelled, well, then there are a number of follow-on consequences that happen thereafter. So we don't, it's almost a bit of a nuclear button that they would have there. So it'll be quite interesting to see not only from an income tax perspective, but GST consequences and so forth, that we will have this change having a fairly significant impact on the SMSF sector.
The other thing that could potentially happen on the political front is around LRBAs. So the Council of Financial Regulators has now conducted that review into the risk of leverage in super, and the report hasn't been released yet, but depending on what's in that report, that could very well shape sort of the policy around borrowing through SMSFs.
Yeah, so what I guess we saw in the outcomes of the Council of Financial Regulators, and this has been a constant since the Financial Systems Inquiry, where David Murray made that recommendation to prohibit the use of borrowing within superannuation, and then quite clearly that has a flow-on effect to limited recourse borrowing arrangements. Now, the coalition government decided not to proceed with that, but used this Council of Financial Regulators to regularly review that process. And it was this Council of Financial Regulators that was actually the trigger to the ATO's letters that went out for the investment strategy requirements back a few years ago, because they were looking at that issue of diversification and lack of diversification and how trustees manage that process. So this, I guess, is again the next step, saying, well, let's keep reviewing this and providing guidance back to the government. And broadly speaking, they're saying, well, we don't perceive leverage in super as presenting any major risk at this point in time. Now, while saying that, obviously there are some individual risks on individuals taking on too much leverage within the superannuation system through limited recourse borrowing arrangements. So it was kind of a double-edged sword in terms of the way that the response was, that they didn't see any major numbers in there that would provide them with any significant levels of concern in the use of borrowing. And a lot of that's because we've seen main tier lenders disappear, and we've really got a secondary tier market in terms of providing that lending on a commercial and residential space. But there is still the individual level of exposure to leverage, which magnifies the losses there. So whether we see the Labor government utilise the information within that report, we'll just need to wait and see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. So we're now going to be joined by Daniel Butler, Director of DBA Lawyers. He's going to be taking us through the process of going through the ATO's voluntary disclosure service where clients have made contraventions or there's issues in their funds, and providing some tips on how to go about that. So we're now joined by Daniel Butler, Director of DBA Lawyers. Hi, Daniel. How are you?
Very well. Thank you, Miranda.
Thank you so much for joining us today. So we're going to be discussing the ATO's voluntary disclosure service. So just to start off, can you give us a bit of a rundown of what it is and what kind of circumstances people might use it in?
Sure. It's the opportunity you have to go to the ATO to say, look, ATO, I've contravened one of the SIS provisions. I want to fess up. I want to fix up. Please go lightly on penalties. So it's your opportunity. When you know you've sort of messed up, it's your opportunity to go forward and effectively be forgiven of your sins. So you bear all, you tell all, you make an appropriate submission, and you say to the ATO, please go lightly on me.
And Dan, this was something that has changed over time, if we think about it, wasn't it? Because there was the concept of voluntary disclosure, I guess, has changed from what was previously there, from an undertaking, to somewhat of a shift where the ATO's got a number of ways in which they can deal with non-compliance now.
Correct. So in the old days, people, and I'm sure you did as I did, we have our contacts at the ATO. So when we had a basket case put to us to say, look, we've made these contraventions, ripped money out, we've been a naughty person, how do we fix it? We would go to our known ATO contact and deal with it informally. But this was the system to bring it together. And as you said, we go back in about 2014, we had the admin penalties brought in, and the admin penalties was the way to dish out penalties, which were not going to be necessarily the nuclear bomb type thing. It's not the render it non-complying, take 47% of the assets. Today it's 45%, but still that's a very big penalty. Having said that, we are seeing some really high numbers with the admin penalty. So the admin penalty, and the admin penalty, when you start looking at it today, $13,200 a pop, which is going to go up sizably next year, and it could go up again in the year after. I believe the next year it could go up to $16,500 for a 60 penalty unit penalty. And when you say have two individual trustees, you double that. And where people, like one of the major contraventions, and Justice Justin McHale just described this recently in Sydney at a seminar, that, there's over 6,500 super funds with nearly 40,000 contraventions. So each fund has an average score of around 3 contraventions. So it's not just a one-off. So 2 individual trustees, 3 contraventions at $13,200 a pop. It sort of winds up to hundreds of thousands quite easily.
So the other thing then, so through the process of COVID, the ATO took a very conciliatory approach to issues and compliance issues, and some people may have taken opportunities to look to rectify during that period and some haven't. I guess there has been a profound shift though now, haven't we, as in particular probably the last 6 months or so, where not only have we seen COVID relief finalised, and the ATO has been very clear on that in the SMSF context, but they've also changed tact, I guess, in dealing with non-compliance as well.
Well, they are, and they have stepped things up. So as you said, during COVID, it was really the ATO officers were at the forefront of dishing out aid, helping, being sympathetic and empathetic to taxpayers. Yeah, that's stepped up, and now they're into compliance mode. So they are now doing reviews, examinations. You're getting down to even questionnaires on rental properties. You might have a rental property in the fund. It could be an extensive questionnaire to respond to. So the ATO are out there. They're issuing a lot of follow-up for tax payments that are outstanding. They certainly want to bring in the outstanding tax returns. It's quite a number of over 80,000 funds, I believe. 80,000 returns are outstanding with funds. So there's quite a large proportion of returns that they're still trying to bring in. And the ATO are really stepping up to that firmer. What they say with early engagement and voluntary disclosure, we are firm, but we are fair. And coming forward, you are getting that element of, they will take that into account. So if you've done your best and you have, look, we're all human, we all make errors, but if you have made those errors, if you have been tempted, particularly through that hard time financially, etc., if you're trying to run the household or run your business and you have been tempted and you have put your hand in that cookie jar and you've got away with it. And there's no one there to slap you on the wrist to get that mitten out of that cookie jar, the money jar. Then, you got away with it a few times, but now it's time to answer up. And we have had clients like that, clients who had felt that the world was on their shoulders. They had no other option but to sort of save the business or save the family. And we've had to go forward and put the best case forward to the ATO and say, look, ATO, this person was under immense pressure. They know they did the wrong thing. They're now wanting to do their best to return the fund to full compliance. These are our steps. So you really want to have an orchestrated plan worked out. You want to have your cash flow position and put forward a viable submission to the ATO to show remorse, to show that you're out there to do the right thing, to show at times, look, if it's really bad, you might want to fall on your own sword. It's like, hey, ATO, I really have been naughty. I know I've stuffed up. It was too tempting, and the self-managed fund is really not for me. I don't have that self-responsibility. I don't have that discipline, and I'm happy to hand in my ticket. Just, render me a disqualified person. And you will notice over the last year or so that the number of disqualified persons risen quite substantially from year on, year out. So the ATO is using that as a strategy to get rid of those people who are really not suitable for the self-managed fund environment.
Okay. And are there particular types of contraventions where a trustee might get a better outcome or more lenient approach from the ATO by making that voluntary disclosure?
Miranda, I think it's on all counts. So if you look at it, the system is set up for contraventions, for unrectified contraventions. So if it's a rectified contravention, you might just rely upon the ACR, and the ACR will be reviewed by the ATO. The ATO will review, as mentioned before, for last financial year, I believe there's about 40,000 ACRs that the ATO have on about 6,500 funds. So they sift through those. They look at the nature of those ACRs. They see whether you're a repeat offender, and they will scale their activity accordingly. And if you've had a number of them, well, you might expect an admin penalty. You might expect a notice of show cause. You've got 28 days to show cause. So I would encourage all funds, as the ATO have said before, having a self-managed fund is an entitlement. It's sort of like you have to play by the rules. So you're in a system, the concessions are handed out because there are rules that you need to play by. And if you don't play by those rules, then you suffer the consequences. And this is particularly, really one of the biggest contraventions we've noted throughout the last couple of years. And this is a constant, is really people helping themselves to the money. It's either a loan or it's early access. And that's why I used that analogy before. It's you've put your hand in the cookie jar and you're just helping yourself. It's not as if someone's there to say control the purse strings, because you are the controller of the purse strings. You are the trustee. You have control of the bank account. And just on that point, if we go back to Triway was a AAT case where the son was a trustee. His parents were also co-trustees, but he had a drug habit and he had access to the bank account. It wasn't a good idea because he really burnt up most of his parents' their superannuation savings by his drug habit, which was really quite a pity.
With, I guess, businesses struggling a bit more than they have been in previous years with the economic environment, do you think we'll see sort of that on the increase, people pulling money out of their funds?
It's always a temptation for small businesses in particular. So small businesses, if they cannot pay their employees, they cannot pay for the food to be put on the table, their kids to go to school, it's an ongoing temptation that they really have to be disciplined to say, look, if we're running to those problems, let's seek some government support. Can we get a loan? Can we realise some assets? So it is something that businesses in particular have to be careful about. It's not only taking money of their self-managed fund, but it's also not paying things like their super guarantee or their pay-as-you-go or their GST. So businesses have a lot of obligations. And really, we're going to see a lot more in insolvency work moving forward and restructuring work. That's already starting to happen, especially with the ATO gearing up their recovery of small business debt.
Dan, I was going to just sort of the role that an advisor can play in this, because you touched on before about, it may be a loan, it may be a legal early access of benefits. The ATO is giving us a lot more structure and clarity around how these things are being treated. Of course, we've got some draft guidance around whether the commissioner would provide discretion in respect to benefits that have been taken out. So if you do identify, a client may be in a financially difficult position, the answer may not immediately just tip the money back in, because the horse is bolted in the eyes of the ATO in that regard. So it's really trying to then understand what steps do I have to take next, and that may form part of it going back into the fund, but it may also form part of moving into a voluntary disclosure process with the ATO too.
Look, definitely the case, Aaron, and in our firm, what we do a whole examination of what's being done. So we go back and really get to the base of what's going on, make inquiries, build up our case, working out what's going on. Because as you said, was it a loan? Some people may say it was a loan. Was there a documented loan agreement? The ATO's position is, unless there is a documented loan agreement, they would generally treat that as early access. And as you said, early access, well, if you put the money back in and the ATO treat that as early access, then the money is fully accessible to you as early access. Even the tax-free component is accessible fully under Section 304.10 of the ITAA 1997.
Yep.
So you've got to be very careful of just establishing what the facts were, making sure the paperwork is consistent, and making sure you, as a professional, and I highly recommend this, Aaron, and I recommend this to everyone out there, do not try to defend yourself. The old saying, those who try to defend themselves have a fool for a client.
Yeah.
Because really what we're doing, if you as a professional or me as a lawyer and the client telling us the story, we can check it out. We're the first filter before it goes to the ATO. And it's surprising what you will find out in that putting together the puzzle. What's happened? This fact, this document, that document. Because the worst thing is you don't want to end up in jail. And I was just reviewing a case. It was the Crown and Saxby in 2011. And the client was actually taking cash, in this case, out of a business. It was taking it out of a bakery business. It was a bakery business. They took about $1,000 out on a weekend or a public holiday, and that was the cash, one set of books for the tax man and one set of books for the business. Well, the accountant prepared the objections, but the objection said the accounts were properly prepared and accurate, and that was a false and misleading statement, which cost the taxpayer 2 years in jail, plus fines. So you've got to be very careful. And in an income tax sense, if you do make a voluntary disclosure, like on NALI, on non-arm's length income, then if you come forward to the tax office before they undertake an examination or review or an audit, then your tax penalties are reduced by 80%. If there is a notification of a review or an audit, your tax penalties are reduced by 20%. So even on the tax front, but you cannot make a voluntary disclosure for the early engagement voluntary disclosure for tax, because there are two separate sort of processes within the ATO. So, the ATO on the early engagement and voluntary disclosure for super is really CIS contraventions, whereas NALI is really just a tax matter. And that's where you get your 80% reduction in the tax penalty. And that's generally dealt with sometimes through the super department, but they generally get the income tax people at the office involved to handle the NALI assessments.
You've given us a lot of interesting insight today, but were there any other tips for SMSF professionals or their clients that you have?
Well, it's really play by the rules, play with a straight bat, don't tell porkies, and fix up, fess up, then get down on your hands and knees and pray for forgiveness.
Yeah, and I think, Dan, just to add to that, the real intent of how they go about trying to fix this will play a pretty significant role, because if kind of lip service is given to it, then expect lip service back from the ATO. Whereas I think the experiences I've had along the way is where there's been an identification of an issue and then there's been genuine intent, then the ATO typically will have that genuine intent back, trying to come to what would be a satisfactory resolution for all parties.
Exactly. And they'd like to see that cooperation. They'd like to see that spirit of, hey, ATO, we're saving you work. Here's a lovely submission supported by all the documents everything stacks up. You want to have it, all your work done. Think about even the enforceable undertaking as part of your rectification program. So look, ATO, yes, we've withdrawn some money. Look, our cash flow will support a repayment. This is what we're committing to. Here's the enforceable undertaking. Please sign it off, and then let's get, down to paying it and even make a few payments along the way.
Right. Yep.
There's one decision. I was just reviewing that before, ZDDD. And ZDDD was an AAT decision in 2011. And Mr. K was a lawyer and his wife was a doctor, and they had certain contraventions. And they put forward an enforceable undertaking to the ATO, which the ATO refuted and rejected. And they took the commissioner on to the AAT to say, well, why did you refute that? And they had put forward a submission to say we wanted more than 6 months. And the ATO said, no, that's too long. So don't try to push it too long. Do your best. And at times people say, look, they can't possibly make those repayments over that period. And we say, hang on, you're sitting on some good investments outside of super and you're telling me you cannot make those repayments. You need to show the ATO you are willing to, go to some good lengths to actually make good. And that make good, don't try to press it too far.
Well, you are a wealth of knowledge, as always, and we certainly appreciate you coming on once again for this show. Once again, I think you've given us some great insight into a topic that is ever present within the SMSF industry. We can't hide from it. We know that we come across clients that will come into problems from a CIS compliance perspective, and you certainly sort of lead the way in this area. So again, thank you for being part of the SMSF Advisor Show today.
Thank you. And the other thing is as well, it's amazing at times people are letting things fester because it's too hard for them to get their head around. I'm worried. But really, just bite the bullet. Just go with it. Just don't let things fester.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and again, that it's that intent. If you can kind of get the ball moving and showing the intent that you're trying to fix it, you will have the ATO work with you to try and get the right resolution. So thank you once again.
Definitely. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you.
So Miranda, once again, it was fantastic to hear from Dan with some real practical insights into the way in which, you can assist or trustees going into that voluntary disclosure. Kind of a bit scary, isn't it, when you think about that you've had this compliance issue, but part of it is to understand what the journey looks like and try and get the right outcomes there. So from that, what did you take away?
I think the thing that he really highlighted is not to let the problems just linger there, to just get in and sort it out straight away. And to show the ATO that you really are committed to fixing it up as well, not delaying with the payments, as he said.
Yeah, kind of stretching it out. It's one thing to get a period of grace, but it's the other to, just kind of stretch the friendship a little bit. So, I think in this area, it is really important, as you just said then, that it is called early engagement for a reason, not, delayed engagement. And so part of that journey is to identify and then go into discussion. And Dan, I think, also referenced there that you don't want to kind of do this yourself. You don't want to be your own client, the plumber with the leaky tap, for example. So because you don't have the exposure to understanding the story that sits underneath. And I think he spoke about it in his own practice, the way that they go about this kind of identification of what the issues are and what they should be doing. And I think that's really poignant point for people to go, I'm not sure. I don't know how difficult or how simple of a process this might be. So let's get the relevant expertise to actually help us unpack this in a way that we can give the information to the ATO to try and get a satisfactory outcome for everyone.
Yeah, and as he sort of highlighted, it's important to get it sort of right in the way that you present it to the ATO as well. So getting the expertise is really important.
Yeah. So as is always the way, if people have any ideas, speakers or suggestions for our SMSF Advisor Show, how can they get in contact with us?
They can get in contact at editor@smsfadvisoronline.com.au.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for today's SMSF Advisor Show, and I look forward to you joining us for our next episode. Until then, take care and bye for now.
Interest rates are rising fast, and that means higher mortgage repayments. But some lenders have increased their rates more than others, so that could mean your clients are now paying too much for their loan. We can quickly compare your client's rate with hundreds of similar loans, so you are confident that you've got the best rate on the market, or we'll find you a better rate. Make sure your clients aren't paying the highest interest rates. Call Finny today. Visit finny.com.au and let us take the research and admin out of finding a new rate for your clients.